They cheered the landing until the crew asked for one passenger by name. The plane touched down to thunderous applause. Everyone grateful to be alive after the terrifying emergency landing. But then the flight attendant's voice cut through the celebration, asking for one specific passenger to identify himself. In that moment, Marcus Williams realized his nightmare was just beginning. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. And please, like and subscribe for more videos like this. Marcus Williams fastened his seatbelt as Flight 447 prepared for departure from Chicago. He was heading home to Atlanta after a grueling week of medical conferences. As a cardiothoracic surgeon, Marcus had just presented his groundbreaking research on minimally invasive heart procedures. His presentation had been well received, and he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment as he settled into seat 1-2A. The middle-aged woman beside him smiled politely before returning to her magazine. Marcus pulled out his tablet, planning to review patient files during the 3-hour flight. He had surgeries scheduled for Monday morning, and he wanted to be prepared. The plane filled quickly with business travelers, families, and college students heading back from spring break. Marcus barely noticed the bustle around him as he focused on his work. He had learned long ago to find peace in the chaos of airports and airplanes. It was part of the job, part of the life he had built through years of sacrifice and dedication. The engines roared to life, and the plane began its taxi toward the runway. Marcus glanced out the window at the gray Chicago skyline fading behind them. He thought about his daughter's upcoming birthday. She would be turning 9 next week, and he had promised to be home in time to help plan her party. His wife had texted him that morning with cake flavor options and party theme ideas. Marcus smiled at the memory. Being a surgeon meant missing moments sometimes, but he tried his best to be present for the important ones. The plane lifted off smoothly, climbing through the clouds into clear blue sky. Marcus returned his attention to his tablet, making notes on a particularly complex case. A 62-year-old patient with severe coronary artery disease. The surgery would be delicate, requiring every ounce of his skill and experience. He was so absorbed in his work that he did not notice the first signs of trouble. 30 minutes into the flight, a loud bang echoed through the cabin. The plane shuddered violently, and oxygen masks dropped from the overhead compartments. Passengers screamed as the aircraft lurched to one side. Marcus grabbed the armrests, his medical training kicking in immediately. He scanned the cabin, assessing for injuries, looking for anyone who might need immediate help. The woman beside him was hyperventilating, her face pale with terror. Marcus spoke to her in a calm, steady voice, telling her to breathe slowly, to put on her oxygen mask, to stay as calm as possible. His own heart was racing, but his hands remained steady. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, strained but professional. Engine failure. They would need to make an emergency landing in Indianapolis. 20 minutes out. The cabin erupted in panicked voices, crying children, and frantic prayers. Marcus helped the woman beside him secure her mask properly, then checked on the elderly man across the aisle who looked like he might be having a heart attack. Marcus identified himself as a doctor, asked the man about his symptoms, and instructed a flight attendant to bring the medical kit. He took the man's pulse, asked about chest pain, shortness of breath, any history of heart problems. The man nodded weakly, clutching his chest. Marcus worked quickly, administering aspirin from the medical kit, monitoring the man's vital signs as best he could without proper equipment. Around him, the plane continued to shake and drop altitude. Every instinct told Marcus they were in serious danger, but he forced himself to focus on what he could control. He could help this man. He could keep him stable until they landed. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with remarkable composure, checking seatbelts, securing loose items, preparing passengers for the emergency landing. Marcus caught the eye of one attendant, a young man with red hair, and gave him a thumbs up to indicate his patient was stable for now. The attendant nodded gratefully before moving on to the next row. The 20 minutes felt like hours. The plane descended rapidly, the pressure change making Marcus's ears pop painfully. He kept his hand on the elderly man's wrist, monitoring his pulse, offering reassurance. The woman beside Marcus was crying quietly now, her hands clasped tightly together. Through the window, Marcus could see the ground rushing up to meet them, the Indianapolis airport coming into view. The landing was rough, but controlled. The plane hit the runway hard, bounced once, twice, then skidded along the tarmac with the screech of brakes and burning rubber. Luggage compartments flew open, spilling bags into the aisles. A woman's laptop flew past Marcus's head, missing him by inches. The plane tilted dangerously to one side before finally, mercifully, coming to a stop. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then the cabin erupted in cheers and applause. People were crying, laughing, hugging strangers, thanking the pilots and crew. Marcus exhaled deeply, his shoulders sagging with relief. They had made it. They were alive. He checked on the elderly man, who was weak but responsive. The woman beside Marcus grabbed his hand and squeezed it, tears streaming down her face. Emergency vehicles surrounded the plane, their lights flashing through the windows. The pilot announced that everyone should remain seated, while the crew assessed the situation and prepared for evacuation. Then the head flight attendant's voice came over the intercom, clear and authoritative. She thanked everyone for their cooperation during the emergency. She praised the passengers for remaining calm. And then she said something that made Marcus's blood run cold. The crew needed to speak with passenger Marcus Williams immediately. Could Marcus Williams please identify himself? The cheering stopped. Heads turned, passengers looking around, trying to spot whoever Marcus Williams was. Marcus felt every eye in the cabin searching, scanning faces, looking for the man whose name had just been called. His hand was still being held by the woman beside him, and he felt her grip loosen, felt her pull away slightly. The elderly man across the aisle stared at him with confusion and something else. Something that looked like suspicion. Marcus raised his hand slowly, his voice steady despite the anxiety rising in his chest. He identified himself as Marcus Williams, seat 12A. He was a doctor, he added, unsure why he felt the need to explain. The head flight attendant made her way down the aisle toward him, her expression unreadable. She was a tall woman in her 50s with short grey hair and sharp eyes. She stopped beside his row and asked Marcus to come with her to the front of the plane. She did not smile. She did not explain. Marcus unfastened his seatbelt and stood, aware of the dozens of faces watching him. The cabin that had been full of celebration moments ago now felt tense and hostile. He could hear whispers starting, could feel the shift in energy. What had he done? Why were they singling him out? He followed the attendant up the aisle, his mind racing through possibilities. Had someone accused him of something? Had his help with the elderly man been seen as inappropriate somehow? Nothing made sense. The attendant led him past the first-class cabin to the galley area near the cockpit. 2 other flight attendants stood there, along with a man in a pilot's uniform. They all looked at Marcus with expressions he could not quite read. Professional, guarded. The head attendant spoke first. She asked Marcus if he had interfered with any passenger during the flight. Marcus's confusion deepened. He explained about the elderly man, about providing medical assistance, about helping the woman next to him with her oxygen mask. He had identified himself as a doctor. He had only tried to help. The pilot cut him off. They had received a complaint. A passenger had reported that Marcus had been acting suspiciously during the emergency, that he had been touching other passengers without permission, that his behavior had made people uncomfortable. Marcus felt the floor drop out from under him. The accusation was so absurd, so disconnected from reality, that for a moment he could not even form words to respond. He had been helping people. He had potentially saved a man's life. And now he was being accused of what, exactly? Suspicious behavior? The attendant's voice was firm, but not unkind. She explained that they had to take all complaints seriously, especially given the circumstances of the emergency landing. They needed to ask him some questions before allowing passengers to disembark. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, hot and sharp. He asked who had made the complaint. What specifically was he being accused of? The crew members exchanged glances. They could not share that information, they said, but several passengers had expressed concern about his actions during the flight. Several passengers. Marcus thought about the cheers that had filled the cabin just minutes ago. He thought about the gratitude in the elderly man's eyes, the woman's hand squeezing his in relief. And now, suddenly, he was a threat. He was suspicious. He was someone who needed to be questioned and detained while everyone else walked free. Marcus took a deep breath and forced himself to stay calm. He explained his credentials slowly. He was a cardiothoracic surgeon at Emory University Hospital. He had been attending a medical conference in Chicago. He had provided emergency medical care to a passenger who appeared to be experiencing cardiac distress. He had done exactly what any doctor would do, what he was ethically obligated to do. He could provide identification, medical credentials, contact information for the hospital, anything they needed to verify his story. The pilot's expression softened slightly, but the attendants remained guarded. They asked for his identification. Marcus reached for his wallet, moving slowly and deliberately, hyper-aware that his every movement was being scrutinized. He handed over his driver's license and his hospital identification badge with his photo, and credentials clearly displayed. The head attendant examined the ID cards carefully, then excused herself to make a phone call. Marcus stood in the cramped galley space, flanked by crew members, feeling like a criminal. Through the gap in the curtain, he could see passengers in their seats, some craning their necks to see what was happening, others pointedly looking away. He wondered what they were thinking, what stories were being constructed about him in their minds. The attendant returned after what felt like an eternity. She handed Marcus his identification and said they had verified his credentials with the hospital. They appreciated his assistance during the emergency. However, they still needed to file a report about the complaint. Airport security would need to speak with him before he could leave the terminal. Marcus felt exhaustion wash over him. Even with his credentials verified, even with his innocence clear, the process would continue. The suspicion had been planted, and now it had to be investigated, documented, filed away in some database. His name would be associated with this incident forever. A complaint made during an emergency landing. Suspicious behavior. It did not matter that he had been helping. It did not matter that he had potentially saved a life. The passengers began to disembark. Marcus was told to wait until everyone else had left the plane. He stood in the galley, watching the stream of people filing past. Some glanced at him with curiosity. Others avoided looking at him altogether. The elderly man he had helped paused as he passed, supported by a flight attendant. He met Marcus's eyes and nodded, a small gesture of thanks or acknowledgement. Marcus nodded back, grateful for that small moment of recognition. The woman who had been sitting beside him walked past without looking at him, her eyes fixed straight ahead. The plane emptied slowly. Families with small children, business travelers with their carry-on bags, college students with their backpacks, all of them free to go, to continue their journeys, to tell their stories about the emergency landing and how they survived. Marcus remained behind, waiting. When the last passenger had deplaned, 2 airport security officers boarded. They were professional but firm. They asked Marcus to accompany them to a private office in the terminal. They assured him this was just standard procedure, nothing to worry about, just a few questions. Marcus followed them off the plane and through the terminal. People stared as they passed. A black man being escorted by security officers. Marcus kept his head up, his expression neutral, but inside he felt humiliated and angry. In the security office, the questions began again. Could he explain his actions during the flight? Why had he been touching other passengers? Had anyone given him permission to provide medical care? Marcus answered each question with as much patience as he could muster. He explained again about his medical training, his ethical obligation to help, the nature of the emergency. He provided additional documentation, phone numbers for colleagues who could vouch for him, a detailed account of exactly what he had done and why. The officers typed his answers into their computers, nodding occasionally, their faces betraying nothing. After an hour of questioning, they finally told him he was free to go. There would be no charges. The complaint had been investigated and found to be without merit. They apologized for the inconvenience and thanked him for his cooperation. Marcus left the office feeling drained and hollow. He collected his luggage and made his way through the terminal, past the restaurants and shops, past the other travelers going about their normal days. He called his wife from the gate, while waiting for the next flight to Atlanta. His voice cracked as he told her what had happened. She listened in silence, and when he finished, she simply said she was sorry. She said she loved him. She said she was glad he was safe. She did not say she was surprised, because they both knew this was not the first time something like this had happened, would not be the last. Marcus had been followed in stores, watched by security guards, pulled over by police for no reason. He had been questioned about whether he really was a doctor, whether he really belonged in the upscale neighborhood where he lived, whether he really was the parent of his light-skinned daughter. He had learned to carry extra identification, to speak carefully, to make himself as non-threatening as possible. But even that was not always enough. On the plane, helping people during an emergency, he had still been seen as a threat. The flight to Atlanta was uneventful. Marcus sat in silence, too tired to work, too wound up to sleep. He thought about the elderly man whose life he might have saved. He thought about the passengers who had cheered their survival one moment and suspected him the next. He thought about his daughter's birthday party, about the normal life he would return to, about the weight he carried that others did not see or understand. When the plane landed in Atlanta, there was no applause, just the usual shuffle of passengers gathering their belongings and heading for the exits. Marcus waited until most people had deplaned before standing. He walked through the familiar airport, through the crowds of travelers, out into the warm Georgia evening. His wife was waiting for him at arrivals, and when he saw her, something inside him finally broke. She held him while he cried, right there in the middle of the airport. Not caring who saw the next week, Marcus went back to work. He performed surgeries, saved lives, taught residents, attended meetings. He helped plan his daughter's birthday party. He smiled and laughed and went through the motions of his normal life. But something had shifted. The incident on the plane had reminded him of a truth he sometimes tried to forget, that no amount of education, no level of professional success, no credentials or accomplishments could fully protect him from suspicion. That in moments of crisis, when people were scared and looking for someone to blame, he would always be an easy target. But Marcus also refused to let that truth define him. He had helped someone who needed help. He had done what was right, and he would continue to do so, regardless of the cost. Because that was who he was, not the suspicious stranger some passengers had seen. Not the threat that had to be investigated and contained, but a healer, a father, a man who had dedicated his life to saving others. So, if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this.